Hi there, welcome back to my Encaustic art studio. My name is Cindy James. Today I'd like to demonstrate this project right here. It's an image transfer onto encaustic wax. So this tree I drew on my iPad and then printed it with my color laser printer just on regular paper, and then cut it out and transferred it onto the wax. So I'd like to show you how to do that, and let's get started. For this project, I'm working on an old piece of MDF. It's basically been a test piece that I've been using for quite a while, and so we'll make use of it again. I often like to work on pieces that already have some wax on there, and I find that it helps make interesting backgrounds if it's not totally plain. You can maybe see a little bit of what was there before, but I put on a fair bit of white, so for the most part that's obscured. I have my image here. So this is an original drawing I did on my iPad. It's printed on a color laser printer. So this photo transfer technique is with laser prints, whether they're photocopied or printed on a laser printer. I can't make any assertions about the light fastness of color laser printing. From my understanding, they're they are reasonably light fast, but not as much as black and white, depending on what colors are used. I haven't had anything fade noticeably for as long as I've been using color. Usually I use it minimally as well, and oftentimes I do paint over my transfer in some way. So anyway, this is, like I say, an original drawing, and I find that if you print or photocopy onto a high quality paper, that you get a better transfer, and I believe that's because the fibers are closer together. There's just more for the image to print onto. So I will make sure I include the type of paper that I used here, but it's regular photocopy paper. It's just a higher weight. So anyways, you want to work on a very warm panel. So I'm going to heat this up. You don't want it to be liquid when you do your transfer, but you do want it to be very warm. So I'll give it a couple of passes. Okay, and for photo transfer, I usually end up taking my gloves off just so I can feel what I'm doing. Now, I haven't put any painting on this panel, so you can do it either way. Either put your image down and work around that, or start painting and then have your image fit. So I usually start with my fingers, just because I don't want to gouge my panel. It's quite hot. I can even feel the heat through the paper. So I'll start rubbing. And you do want to have it on a flat surface, because any texture, the image won't be able to go down into the little valleys. So my studio's in the garage, and I do get bugs in here. I had a spider living in my window for one summer, but by the end of the year, he was just getting too big, and I had to say goodbye. I was willing to share the space for a while anyway. Okay, and then after I've sort of got it sticking down, I'll switch to a spoon. And you can't burnish more, like too much, basically. I usually do this until my arm is tired. So I'll speed this part up because you don't really need to suffer this with me. Usually I'll turn the panel and keep burnishing from different directions to make sure I get a really good coverage. So often what I'll do when I'm burnishing is I'll put my finger kind of at the edge, because what usually happens is you end up going off the paper, gouging your wax. So if you just put your finger as a little bit of a stopper, it does help. Now you want to be firm, but not so firm that you're gouging through the paper into the wax. Okay, so I think that's probably good as far as burnishing. It feels pretty solid on there. There's nothing loose. Now you don't need to burnish all around the edges. I mean, you're not transferring the shape of the paper, and what happens is when you transfer, it does leave a bit of a sheen on the wax, so you really just want your image. So don't worry about getting right to the edge, especially if there's a lot of white space around here. Just focus on what's in the middle, and that's really all you need to do. Okay, so I usually put down some paper towel because it gets messy here, and I do have some water. So I just dip my fingers in and I start wetting from the back, and you can soak it down pretty good. And I don't usually worry about trying to rub off, like I say, all that white space. I just try to get the image. I usually soak down the whole piece of paper, but remember when you're creating your image for photo transfer that it will be reversed because it goes face down. It's not the same as collage, so you need to either reverse it in your software or be prepared to work with it opposite to how you printed it. Now if you have good burnishing, you shouldn't lose your image as you rub this off. And I usually do like a first pass and get the majority of it off. And you can see when you hit the wax there. And, at some point you can just start removing just to the edges of the image, and then peel the rest off. Don't worry about trying to rub all that off. Yeah, so I do have some of these lines down here, so I'll keep some of those. And now at this point, yeah, just take that, just peel it off. Okay, so and you can feel the paper. And when you get to the point where you think you're done, you can brush all these little bits off. Usually I'll take another piece of paper towel and just sort of wipe it back. And let's see here. Okay, so it looks pretty good. Can you sort of see the outline of where the paper was? I'm not sure how well that's showing up, but there is a little bit of a sheen here. So that transfer does leave some sort of residue from the printing. Okay, and as it dries, you can see that there is still paper there. So usually what I'll do is I'll let it dry in between and then go at it again. So especially right along this trunk here, and I can even feel that with my finger. So you keep going until there's no paper left. Now you might end up rubbing away a little bit of your image if you take it too far. This one I think is going to come off pretty easily. Some of them, for whatever reason, are more stubborn than others. Okay, once again, I'll just sort of wipe that off. And as it dries, you'll get an idea if there is any paper left there. It looks pretty good. And sometimes if it's a very faint bit of white, I won't worry about it, because when you fuse it, the wax will absorb, or the image will absorb into the wax. Now when you do fuse it, you have to be prepared for a little bit of cracking, especially solid areas of your transfer. If you overdo it, then yeah, as soon as that wax moves a little bit, your transfer is going to crack. And I do have a little fix I can show you. Okay, I'm thinking that's probably pretty good. So I'm going to fuse that very lightly. And I use the Benzomatic Dually here. And just a very gentle fuse. And it always helps to be able to get down and make sure you can see what you're doing. And I usually will give it a few passes. Now, and be aware of your items you might have around your torch. So I did get a little crack there, so I'll show you how I fix that. That's probably good. You don't really need to overdo it. So there is a tiny little crack right about here. I'm not sure if it's going to show up or not. Pretty minor, but I'm just going to show you how I would fix that. Okay, so I had a little adventure looking for the brush I wanted to use, but this is watercolor, and I'm going to fix this with just a tiny bit of watercolor. Now you wouldn't think that watercolor was compatible, but it does work on top of Encaustic. I wouldn't use it for a full painting, but it definitely works for small fixes. Sorry, I'm kind of out of frame there. This is a very old palette, as I'm sure you can see, and I find, you know, the tube ones work better than the sort of liquid or inky type of watercolor, because too much water just causes it to bead on top of the wax, but it does work for small fixes. Sometimes you have to go over it a few times, but I quite like using it for touching up photo transfers, and sometimes I even just go ahead and paint on top of them if I want to make some changes. There's a little crack here too, so once the water dries, the watercolor paint does adhere to the encaustic wax. Especially over top of a transfer, it has something more to adhere to, and actually you could probably do this before you fuse and it would likely stick even better. All right, so I'm going to leave that. That's probably good enough. It's really just a little repair. Looks pretty good, and I think it's dry, so I'm going to give that another very light fuse. And from here I can work on this photo transfer and finish it off as a painting. So I'll do a little bit of that, and if you want to follow along, you're more than welcome. So that's one of the great things about these Silpat mats is when this cools, I can just, you know, pick it right off the mat, although it's probably going to stick more to the panel, and I can scrape it off the edges and throw it in. So hopefully it looks like I totally intended to do that, which I didn't. It was kind of on its way to a major fail, so I thought, well, let's white it out and melt it down and see what happens. So one of the great things about Encaustic is you can sometimes save a painting when you do that. So I do like the way that's looking at the moment. I wouldn't say it's done. I'll probably play around with it. It was just more for the demonstration of the photo transfer. So, but I do like this look at the bottom here. And the transfer turned out pretty decently as well. So there you go. That's where we're at. Trying to straighten it out. There we go. And hopefully that was useful for you as far as the photo transfer. And thanks for watching.